Bullies yank the waiter's shirt. 10 seconds later, they were smashed. Dante Mercer moved through Rusty's Roadhouse with practiced efficiency, his lean 5'6" frame navigating between tables packed with Friday night customers. Dark hair fell across his forehead in an unkempt way, and his quiet demeanor made him nearly invisible among the louder staff members at the Montana restaurant. 3 months had passed since Dante moved to Cedar Falls, seeking anonymity after leaving behind a life he preferred not to discuss. The small mountain town offered exactly what he needed, a place to blend in while working as just another waiter trying to make ends meet. That's when he encountered them. 3 men occupied the large corner booth, their presence immediately noticeable due to their loud laughter and the way they sprawled across the seats like they owned the place. The leader was unmistakable, Bryce Hutchinson, whose broad shoulders and confident posture commanded attention. His perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive polo shirt suggested money and status that stood out in Rusty's working-class atmosphere. Flanking Bryce were Tyler Morrison, whose nervous energy manifested in finger-drumming and darting glances, and Garrett Wells, a stocky man whose permanent smirk suggested he found most situations amusing at someone else's expense. All 3 wore the casual arrogance of people accustomed to being the biggest fish in Cedar Falls' small pond. "About time," Bryce announced loudly as Dante approached their table. "We've been waiting forever for decent service around here." Dante set plates down carefully, avoiding eye contact. "Sorry about the wait. Kitchen's backed up tonight. Can I get you anything else?" "Yeah, you can get us a waiter who doesn't look like he's about to pass out." Tyler snickered, causing Garrett to chuckle into his beer. "Maybe one who actually speaks up," Garrett added. "What are you, afraid of your own shadow?" "Hey, Scarecrow," Bryce called as Dante turned to leave, the nickname carrying across nearby tables and drawing curious looks. "Try not to spill those drinks with those shaky hands." Their laughter followed him, heat creeping up his neck. He'd dealt with difficult customers before, but this felt different, more personal, more threatening. The harassment escalated over the following weeks. Tyler would accidentally block aisles with his chair. Garrett made loud comments about slow service. Bryce watched with amusement, adding cutting remarks about Dante's appearance or competence. Other diners noticed but said nothing. Sarah Martinez, a veteran server, shot sympathetic looks, but remained silent. Even Bill Rusty, the grizzled owner, seemed to turn a blind eye to the situation developing in his restaurant. They came in regularly, always requesting Dante's section, always finding new ways to make his shifts miserable. On busy nights, they'd order complex modifications, then complain loudly. During slow evenings, they'd linger for hours, nursing single drinks while finding fault with everything. "Look who's coming," Tyler would announce whenever Dante approached, his mock excitement making everyone turn to look. "Ready for another adventure in terrible service." Dante endured it with practiced silence, maintaining professionalism that kept him employed. He needed this job, needed the anonymity Cedar Falls provided. Fighting back would draw attention he couldn't afford. What the trio couldn't know was that their quiet target had spent 8 years training in mixed martial arts before circumstances forced him to walk away from everything he'd built. They couldn't see the calloused knuckles under his sleeves or recognize the controlled breathing and balanced posture from hundreds of hours in the ring. Dante's careful restraint came not from weakness, but from intimate knowledge of exactly how much damage he could inflict if he stopped holding back. The secret sat heavily in his chest every time they pushed further, every time their laughter echoed at his expense. He'd spent months building this new life to avoid confrontation, to escape the violence that had once defined his existence. But as their cruelty grew bolder and more public, Dante fought a battle between his commitment to peace and his rapidly fraying patience. The breaking point came on a humid Thursday evening when the restaurant was moderately busy. Dante was clearing tables when Bryce's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Emma, sweetheart, you don't have to put up with this pathetic excuse for service," Bryce was saying, his tone carrying practiced charm. "A beautiful woman like you deserves better than having some loser stumble around your table all night." Emma Chen was the restaurant's newest server, a college student who'd started 2 weeks earlier. She was kind, hard-working, and had shown Dante nothing but respect, even helping him during difficult shifts. Her attractiveness had made her an instant target for Bryce's attention, though she'd politely deflected his advances. "I'm fine, really," Emma said, her voice tight with discomfort. "Dante's been very professional." "Professional?" Garrett laughed sharply. "Is that what we're calling it when someone can barely carry a plate?" Dante approached slowly, noting how Emma stood trapped between their booth and a neighboring table, her confident demeanor replaced by visible unease. Tyler blocked her easiest escape path while Garrett leaned forward with predatory interest. "Emma's just being nice," Bryce continued, his voice taking on an aggressive edge. "She doesn't want to hurt Scarecrow's feelings by admitting he's completely useless." "I think you gentlemen have had enough to drink tonight," Dante said quietly, setting down his bus tub and facing them directly. "Maybe it's time to settle your tab." Bryce's face shifted into a dangerous smile. "Did he just tell us to leave? Did this pathetic excuse for a man just try to give us orders?" "I heard it too," Tyler confirmed, nervous energy suddenly focused. "Sounds like Scarecrow's getting too big for his britches." What happened next occurred so quickly that nearby diners barely registered the action. Bryce lunged forward and grabbed Dante's uniform shirt, his powerful grip twisting the fabric as he yanked Dante toward the table. The motion was violent and sudden, designed to humiliate and demonstrate dominance in front of Emma and other patrons. "Listen carefully, you worthless piece of—" Bryce began, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. He never finished the sentence. Dante's response was instinctive, drawing from years of suppressed training. His left hand shot up and clamped down on Bryce's wrist with crushing force, applying pressure to nerve points that sent immediate pain up the bigger man's arm. Simultaneously, his right hand drove upward in a precise strike that caught Bryce below the ribcage, targeting the solar plexus with surgical accuracy. Bryce's grip released immediately as his diaphragm spasmed, leaving him gasping while his arm went numb. But Dante wasn't finished. Moving with fluid precision, he pivoted and used Bryce's momentum against him, executing a hip toss that sent the larger man crashing into the neighboring table with devastating force. The sound echoed like a gunshot, causing conversations to halt and heads to turn. Plates and glasses crashed as the table tilted, sending Bryce tumbling onto the hardwood floor in a tangle of limbs and scattered silverware. Tyler recovered first, launching himself with a wild haymaker at Dante's head. The punch was telegraphed and clumsy, exactly what Dante had learned to counter years ago. He ducked easily, stepped inside Tyler's guard, and delivered a sharp elbow strike to his ribs that folded him in half. A follow-up knee to Tyler's lowered head put him on the ground beside his leader. Garrett hesitated for a crucial moment that cost him any chance of effective attack. Dante closed the distance in 2 steps, grabbed Garrett's shirt with both hands, and executed a textbook sacrifice throw that slammed him backward into the booth with bone-jarring force. The entire confrontation lasted perhaps 10 seconds, leaving all 3 bullies in various states of pain and disbelief, while the restaurant sat in stunned silence. Dante stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing controlled and stance-balanced, looking nothing like the quiet waiter who'd served them countless times. Bryce struggled to his hands and knees, face flushed with humiliation. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, and his expensive shirt was torn and stained. "You're dead," he wheezed. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Dante looked down with calm, steady eyes that held no trace of fear. "Actually, I know exactly who I'm messing with. The question is whether you know who you've been messing with. The transformation in Dante's presence was remarkable. Gone was the hunched posture and downcast gaze. Instead, he stood with confident bearing of someone completely comfortable with violence, someone who understood his capabilities and wasn't afraid to use them when necessary. "This is how it's going to work," Dante continued, his tone conversational but carrying underlying steel that made Tyler and Garrett shrink back. "You're going to pay your tab, apologize to Emma for making her uncomfortable, then leave. If I see you harassing anyone else here, if I hear about you bothering Emma anywhere in town, we're having another conversation. Trust me when I say you won't enjoy that conversation." Bryce's face cycled through emotions: disbelief, rage, and finally something approaching fear as he processed the complete power reversal. He was accustomed to being the predator, controlling situations through intimidation. Finding himself on the receiving end, especially in front of an audience, shattered his understanding of his place in Cedar Falls hierarchy. "You can't just assault people," Garrett protested weakly, dabbing his bleeding lip. "We'll call the cops." Dante's smile was thin and humorless. "You grabbed me first, remember? In front of 30 witnesses who've watched you harass me for weeks. Montana's self-defense laws are pretty clear." The truth settled over them like a cold blanket. They had been the aggressors, escalated to physical contact first, and everyone had seen it. Their bullying pattern was well known, making it unlikely anyone would defend them. Emma stepped forward, shock giving way to admiration. "Are you okay?" she asked, her concern genuine. "I'm fine," Dante replied, his voice gentling. "I'm sorry you had to see that. No one should deal with that kind of behavior." The sincerity in his words, combined with his protective intervention, created a moment of connection that didn't go unnoticed. Several diners nodded approval, their sympathies clearly with the quiet waiter who'd finally stood up for himself and the harassed woman. Tyler fumbled for his wallet, hands shaking as he threw cash on the table, enough to cover their bill and a generous tip that spoke to his desperation to end the encounter. "We're leaving," he announced unnecessarily, since all three were already moving toward the exit with awkward haste. Bryce paused, his pride demanding some final gesture, despite his rational mind urging retreat. "You think you're tough now, but this town's smaller than you think. Everyone talks to everyone else around here." Dante met his gaze steadily. "Then they'll talk about how you three thought it was fun to pick on someone until you found out you were wrong. They'll talk about how you harassed a woman trying to do her job, and they'll talk about how you ended up on the floor when someone finally stood up to you. That's exactly the kind of story this town will remember." The truth was written across Bryce's face as he realized the complete reversal of his position. Instead of being the story's hero, he'd become its cautionary tale. Without another word, the three men made their way toward the exit, their passage marked by whispered conversations and pointed looks from patrons who'd witnessed their humiliation. Word spread through Cedar Falls with small-town speed. By Saturday morning, everyone had heard some version of how quiet Dante Mercer had put Bryce Hutchinson and his crew in their place. The details grew in telling, but the core narrative remained. The underestimated waiter had revealed hidden depths when pushed too far. At Rusty's, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Staff, who'd previously treated Dante as furniture, now engaged him in conversation. Regular patrons requested his section, their tips notably more generous. Even Bill Rusty expressed grudging respect for someone willing to defend his employees. "Been running this place 15 years, Bill said over coffee in the empty dining room. "Seen plenty of folks get pushed around by bullies like Hutchinson. Most just take it. Takes guts to stand up to someone like that." The encounter's aftermath extended beyond the restaurant. Bryce, Tyler, and Garrett found their social standing significantly diminished. other bullying targets, began speaking up, sharing stories that painted a picture of three men who'd used perceived status to make life miserable for anyone they considered beneath them. Dante's victory had broken the spell of fear that had allowed the trio to operate without consequences. The realization that someone they dismissed as weak could defeat them so thoroughly made others question what they might be capable of if they stopped accepting poor treatment as inevitable. For Emma, the incident marked the beginning of something unexpected. Dante's protective instinct and understated competence drew her attention in ways that had everything to do with his character. She began seeking him out during breaks, engaging in conversations that revealed glimpses of who he'd been before Cedar Falls. "You didn't learn to fight like that from YouTube videos," she said one afternoon during their break. "That was too precise, too controlled." Dante watched a hawk circle above the mountain ridges. "I used to compete," he said finally, "mixed martial arts. Had some success, thought it might be my career. Then things got complicated." He didn't elaborate, and Emma didn't push, recognizing the weight behind his words. But the admission explained his discipline, controlled movements, and ability to remain calm under pressure. It also explained his determination to avoid confrontation, understanding better than most where violence could lead. 3 weeks later, Bryce made his last attempt to reclaim damaged pride. He arrived alone on a quiet Tuesday night when the restaurant was nearly empty. Dante was wiping tables for closing when he noticed the familiar figure sliding into a booth. This Bryce was different from the arrogant man who'd tormented him. His confidence was gone, replaced by something approaching desperation. His clothes were wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone whose world had shifted beyond his control. "We need to talk," Bryce said when Dante approached, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. Dante remained standing, posture relaxed but alert. "I'm listening." "This whole thing has gotten out of hand," Bryce continued, words rushing as if rehearsed but still struggling. "People treat me like I'm some monster. My job, relationships, everything's falling apart because of what happened." "What happened," Dante said carefully, "is that you spent months harassing people who couldn't fight back, and eventually picked the wrong target. The consequences are yours to deal with." Bryce's jaw worked silently, pride warring with reality. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? About the harassment, bothering Emma, all of it. I need this to stop. I need people to forget what happened." The grudging apology represented complete reversal from the man who'd confidently grabbed Dante's shirt. But Dante recognized the self-interest behind it, that Bryce was more concerned with repairing his reputation than genuine remorse. "Apologies are a start," Dante said finally, "but forgetting isn't something you control. You spent years building a reputation as someone who pushes people around. It'll take time to build a different one." "Time for what?" Bryce asked, frustration breaking through. "Time to prove you learned something from getting knocked on your ass in front of half the town," Dante replied bluntly. "Time to show you can treat people with respect instead of seeing them as targets. Time to demonstrate you're more than just a bully who got lucky because no one fought back." The words hit Bryce like physical blows, stripping away layers of identity he'd constructed around perceived superiority. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died as he met Dante's steady gaze. There was no anger in those eyes, no gloating, just complete indifference to his distress. Total absence of the fear and respect he'd grown accustomed to inspiring. Dante looked at him like a problem that had been solved and was no longer worth thinking about. "I could have hurt you a lot worse that night," Dante said quietly, matter of fact rather than threatening. "I chose not to, the same way I'm choosing not to make your life more difficult now. But those choices are mine to make, not yours to demand. You want respect? Earn it. Want to be seen as something other than a bully? Become something other than a bully." Dante turned and walked away, leaving Bryce alone to contemplate the ruins of his former status. The conversation was over, the power dynamic permanently established. In the months that followed, Cedar Falls settled into a new normal. Bryce, Tyler, and Garrett still lived in town, but their behavior had transformed. Gone were the loud confrontations and casual cruelty. Instead, they moved through daily routines with the subdued manner of people who'd learned their actions had consequences. Dante continued at Rusty's, but his experience had fundamentally changed. Customers who'd barely noticed him now engaged in friendly conversation. His tips improved significantly, not just from his reputation, but because people genuinely enjoyed interacting with him once they got past his natural reserve. Emma's presence added dimensions he hadn't anticipated. Their shared experience had created a bond beyond workplace friendship. Her respect for his protective instincts and gradual discovery of his complex personality created opportunities for connection he treasured without taking for granted. "You know what I realized?" Emma said one evening as they closed together. "You could have really hurt them that night. You had them helpless, especially Bryce on the ground. But you stopped." Dante paused, his table wiping, considering her observation. "Violence should be a last resort, and when you use it, it should be proportional." They needed to understand their behavior had consequences, but they didn't need permanent damage to learn that lesson. "That's the difference between you and them," Emma said thoughtfully. "They use strength to make people feel small and afraid. You used yours to protect someone and teach a lesson. There's honor in that." The word honor carried weight, speaking to fundamental character differences. Dante had chosen restraint when he could have inflicted serious harm, demonstrating that true strength came from knowing when to stop rather than how hard to hit. 6 months later, Dante encountered Bryce one final time in the grocery store parking lot. Both were loading purchases when their paths crossed, creating an inevitable moment of recognition. Bryce looked different. Older, worn down by social exile since his humiliation. His former confidence was replaced by wariness that suggested he'd learned to think before acting in ways he'd never needed before. "Dante," he said, the name coming out like something difficult to swallow. "Bryce," Dante replied neutrally, continuing to load groceries without breaking rhythm. They stood in silence, the weight of their history settling between them. Finally, Bryce spoke again, his voice carrying something that might have been genuine remorse. "I wanted you to know that I get it now," he said quietly. "What I was doing, how it affected people. I never thought about it from their side before." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. "I was wrong about everything, and I'm sorry." Dante stopped and looked at him directly, studying the man who'd once seemed threatening and now appeared diminished by his own recognition of past behavior. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "It matters." "Does it change anything?" Bryce asked, hope creeping into his voice despite efforts to contain it. Dante considered seriously before responding. "It changes everything. Not what happened, that can't be undone, but it changes who you are going forward, and that's the only thing that really matters." With that exchange, the cycle that had begun with harassment and escalated to confrontation finally reached its natural conclusion. Both men had been changed, Bryce by learning the limits of his power and consequences of his cruelty, Dante by discovering he could defend himself and others without losing his moral center. As they drove away in opposite directions, each carried understanding that strength without wisdom was hollow, and that true victory came not from dominating others, but from maintaining principles under pressure. The quiet waiter had taught the town bully a lesson extending far beyond fighting techniques, demonstrating that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression is calm certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of, both in terms of force and restraint. Cedar Falls returned to normal rhythms, but with new understanding about the importance of standing up for what's right, the danger of assuming weakness based on appearances, and the difference between using strength to harm and using it to protect. In the end, Dante's victory wasn't just about defeating 3 bullies. It was about proving that quiet dignity and hidden strength, when finally revealed, could transform not just individual relationships, but entire communities.